Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Exit Velo podcast. It is episode number 68 already. The groundhog was here earlier this week. He saw his shadow. I guess that means 6 more weeks of winter. But that's all right. We've got some baseball news to discuss in the meantime, and spring training is still right around the corner no matter what that grouchy groundhog says. I'm joined here with my friend and colleague, Adam Cohen. I'm, of course, Henry Winkelhake. As I mentioned, this is the Exit Velo podcast powered by Back Sports Page. Adam, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty well, having a solid week, almost done with online school, so I'm looking forward to wrapping that up. And I must say, Henry, I know we talked about it before the show started, but got a nice scruff going over there, so that's always a pleasure to see.
Hey, I appreciate it, man. This is kind of like months in the making for me. It takes me a long time to get here, but you know, it's nice to see the hard work paying off, and I appreciate the good feedback, man. So it's always nice to get some recognition for the facial flow I've got going on here. It doesn't happen for me very often, but I appreciate it, man. And we definitely do have some baseball headlines to cover tonight. Possibly the most coveted fish of the free agent landscape this offseason, Mr. Trevor Bauer signing a deal. We'll get into that and a couple other big signings in the show, but I want to start off tonight talking about the fact that it looks like the season is going to start on time. There was a proposal this week from the league to the Players Association asking to push back the season and spring training about a month each. So we would have been looking at, I believe, around the 1st of May for the start of the season. The Players Association said, no way, we don't want to do that. We don't want to give Commissioner Manfred any power to potentially shorten the season, and then we get into the whole messy pay argument. So I think good for the game that we avoided that. Just some highlights of that proposal. I mean, it was declined, so I guess these are kind of not, super pressing news at this point, but it would have had expanded playoffs, noting that is 14. It would have been 14 teams instead of the 16 we saw last year. That would have included universal DH. So we presumably will not be seeing either expanded playoffs or universal DH unless there's some other kind of last-ditch agreement here. But it looks like we're moving forward with business as usual. But Adam, I don't know about you, man. I'm excited to hear that the season is starting on time. And I believe that, we have precedent now that they can do it safely. And, it's not going to be a huge risk to go ahead and start the season as scheduled.
Honestly, I was pretty surprised that there were still discussions happening between the MLB and Players Association, because even a couple of weeks ago, we had a podcast saying the season was going to start on time. Rob Manfred told all the GMs it was going to start on time. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks before spring training, the MLB says, nope, we want a 154-game season. We want to delay it by a month. We want to finish the season in November. That was just very strange. That did not sound right at all. And I call BS on the MLB caring about, or truly caring about, the health and safety of the players, because the players say, hey, we're ready to play. They're ready to play. They know better than anyone how to deal with the virus. They're literally playing and risking themselves while they're playing. So if they're ready to go, that's fine. But either way, this will be a brutal CBA negotiations after the season. I still think there's going to be a strike, and I'm just happy that there'll be a normal season, and we'll see what it goes from there.
I completely agree, man. I want to get as many games in this season as possible, because if I had to bet right now, I think that there probably will be a labor stoppage following the 2021 season when we have that what looks to be a very, very ugly fight for the new CBA. We know the owners and the players just pretty much butting heads on anything they can butt heads about these days. Worth noting some other parts of that proposal that I left out in my original intro. It still would have paid the players full salary, even with the season being delayed. That would have been a 154-game season. So perhaps not, all about the money in that sense, that the players still would have gotten more pay. But it was, I guess, a worry that if you push the season back, then something else happens, mass outbreak, that the season then could have been shortened. And then you have the ugly money talks. So I think the players just want to have as long of a, calendar season as possible in addition to the games played. And of course, get that full salary as well. And as far as I'm concerned, good for the players getting their money.
Yeah, I think MLB knew already, like, hey, if we don't give them their full 162 game salary, there's no way the players would even have a chance of agreeing to this. And I can kind of see why they want to delay it, because there's still a lot of people dying in the US because of COVID. There's still a lot of people getting sick. But in a month, maybe there'll be more vaccines. Maybe more people will get tested. I guess that's a thought process behind it. But at this point, we kind of know what we're getting at with COVID. We know the state of the country. We know that there'll be fans in the ballpark, which MLB already said, and it's happening for other sports too. It's a risk, but if fans want to come in, they can come in. They're taking the risk on their own accord. So it didn't seem too logical for them to really delay the season by a month at this point.
And I agree with you again there too, my friend. And, there's precedent at this point that it can be done safely, not only within the MLB. We saw last year, not with fans in the stands per se, but from, a player health and safety perspective, it was done safely. We have the testing infrastructure at this point to where it can be done. So I think it made sense to go ahead and start it on time as well. And I think we have precedent from other sports as well that we are going to be able to have fans in the stands safely to some capacity. And certainly vaccines rolling out is going to help with that as well. It was kind of another interesting wrinkle in this story, too. Apparently, the Biden administration wanted to reach out to the players to discuss the possibility of pushing the season back a month, the administration being in favor of a delayed season. And the Players Association apparently didn't even want to have those talks. They were unwilling to discuss it. And, I don't really fault them for that. I think it looks like it can be done safely. And, I understand where the administration is coming from as well. But, this is players' livelihoods, and they're trying to guarantee, as long of a season as possible and get that full pay. Did you have any thoughts on that Biden administration situation, Adam?
I kind of thought it was unprecedented that they asked the players rather than side with the owners right away, because the owners and really almost any administration throughout baseball history have been pretty tied together. And there's been labor negotiations and senators, for example, the Mitchell report, for example. So to ask the players, I think that's a sign of good faith. But it is pretty hilarious that the players are like, nope, we want to get paid. We want to get this going. I think they're actually going to meet with the Biden administration on their own point or on their own accord at a different time. I think that was mentioned in the article, but they want to do that once the season rolls in. They don't want anything else to happen because of that.
And I think that's fair too, that, we're willing to cooperate with government officials, but that doesn't mean that the season has to be delayed or has to be canceled or anything like that. That we'll take the guidance on doing it safely, but let's get rolling, because I think we have enough evidence to suggest that we can do so. So full speed ahead, and it looks like April 1st, still the plan for opening day, and pitchers and catchers getting ready to report in about 10 days or so now. So we've waited out the long winter. Baseball is just around the corner, and still a lot of big free agents that had yet to be signed coming into this week. And we got a little bit of clarity on that situation for a couple of the major players, namely Trevor Bauer, probably the most talked about, most coveted free agent of the offseason. I think at some point there was like 10 different destinations being rumored for Mr. Bauer's services. In the end, it came down to just the Mets and the Dodgers, with Bob Nightingale even reporting Bauer to the Mets on Thursday. And then Friday rolls around and it ends up he's going to the Dodgers. He's going to the World Series defending champion Dodgers for a 3-year contract worth $102 million, a whole lot of millions for Mr. Bauer. And a very interesting structure to that contract as well. He'll be paid $40 million in 2021, $45 million in 2022, with an opt-out option after each of those 2 years, which I can't imagine he takes, considering that'll make him the highest paid player in baseball for each of those 2 seasons. And not just in baseball history, I should say, for each of those 2 seasons. And then he'll be paid $17 million in 2023. Shall he not opt out? Very, very front-loaded money and very expensive contract, but pitching is scarce. So, I mean, I can't totally fault the Dodgers for going for it and trying to defend that title. Adam, what were your impressions of the Bauer signing?
Honestly, I thought he was going to end up as a Met because he talked about them so much throughout, and Steve Cohen has been such a great owner so far and gone after the big fish and missing on JT Realmuto and George Springer. Looked like they were going to get Trevor Bauer, but I understand from the Mets' perspective. Why would you pay $40 million for 1 year and then $45 million the next year to someone who has really had two exceptional seasons? That doesn't sound right. And at the same time, they still offered him a great deal. The deal the Mets offered him was 3 years, $105 million. So they were still willing to give out $35 million per year, just not 40 or 45, which is understandable. Also, why would the Dodgers still give him or offer him $17 million in the third year? He's totally going to reject that. He could flounder in one of those 2 years, and there's still no way that he would accept that deal. He's certainly going to opt out in that second year, barring some horrendous injury or really, really poor performance. But considering the fact that Bauer's going to a nicer ballpark, he's going to be just fine. He's going to be a loaded rotation with a great defense. He should have a great time in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it like that, but that $17 million in 2023, that almost seems like an automatic opt-out. And they gave him a lot of flexibility in that year, in that contract as well, having those multiple opt-out options, which I definitely would agree. It does seem like he would be on track to exercise that opt-out following the 2022 season. Certainly if he keeps pitching at a Cy Young level, get something closer to $40 million a year. Well, I mean, we'll continue to see how the pitcher market develops, but man, that is so much money. And like you said too, Adam, he's really only had 2 good seasons. I think the majority of his career, he's looked more like a $17 million a year pitcher. So, I mean, maybe he turns back into that guy and there's a chance he would stay for that third year. But I think this looks like an overpay to me, at least in those first 2 seasons. But, I mean, you kind of do have to overpay for pitching. So, I mean, I can't fault the Dodgers too much, but I don't love it at the surface, man. I think the Mets may have dodged a bullet.
I think so too. And I kind of think the Dodgers are dumb for going after Bauer in this way because they still have a great rotation without him. They now have the first rotation since 2014 with 3 former Cy Young Award winners. They didn't need to add another one. And the Dodgers, really since Andrew Friedman came in, have not really signed too many big deals like this. This is not who the Dodgers have been. They've grown their home talent. They trade for expensive players, but turn it into something else. They sign extensions when they need to. They're not this type of team that goes out and pays someone a Trevor Bauer type of deal. That's why I was so surprised. And I still think they can win a World Series without Trevor Bauer. Now it almost seems like it's overkill. And I guess they want to cement that. They wanted a couple extra World Series rings, which I think they can while Bauer's there, maybe 1 or 2. So that's probably the reason. I guess they were maybe a little bit scared of the Padres too.
I love that you tied it back around to the Padres. Perhaps that San Diego arms race that we've seen throughout the offseason, bringing in Blake Snell, Yu Darvish, and Mike Clevenger at the end of last season. Maybe that is kind of the pressure that put the Dodgers in a position to make this deal. They feel the Padres nipping at their heels. And that brings up the next point I wanted to ask, Adam. Do you think that, I mean, I would say probably so, but I think it's worth asking at least. Are the Dodgers the clear team to beat in the NL West, or do you think there's a window that the Padres could get in there and steal that division title?
There's always going to be a window, especially when you're as talented as a team as the San Diego Padres. They still have an incredible team, loaded hitting, loaded pitching. They don't have the best bullpen either. The Dodgers don't too, but they should be just fine. I still feel like the Dodgers are the clear favorites just because they're so overwhelming. They have so many more established players than the Padres. And I think the Padres really came together in a 60-game season, but can they do the same in a 162-game season? The Dodgers have been doing this for pretty much 8 straight years. They know what it takes to go to the playoffs, and they just won a World Series, and they just signed pretty much one of the best pitchers in baseball and one of the best pitchers in the free agent market.
I can't argue with that at all, man. I mean, you look at it strictly on paper, and you probably still give the edge to the Dodgers with what they have on their roster, but not to mention those intangibles that you mentioned there as well. Just the playoff experience, the leadership in the clubhouse. I think that is something that will definitely play over a 162-game season. I think the Padres will be right there and certainly a lock for a wild card spot. But yeah, I would agree with you too that it is the Dodgers' division to lose at this point. And I mean, injuries happen, stuff happens, but that's part of the reason why it's so great to have so much pitching depth. You have that amazing 1 through 5, and then you still have guys like Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin just waiting in the wings, ready to back them up. It's stupid pitcher depth with the Dodgers rotation, and something that we see with the Padres as well. So it's going to be a fun race to watch, certainly. I do think another interesting aspect of this is the Dodgers don't really have a whole lot of financial flexibility moving forward. You have the Mookie mega deal. You now have all this money to Trevor Bauer, Clayton Kershaw still getting paid. I think they have already extended Walker Buehler to where he's making pretty significant money at this point as well. They're going to be in luxury over the luxury tax threshold for the next several years, and they still don't have a third baseman. So, I mean, there are criticisms that you could make. If they end up bringing back Justin Turner, they're going to be well over that luxury tax threshold, which isn't to say they can't compete, but possibly something that could hurt them long term. Just something to keep an eye on there for the Dodgers. But Adam, are you super concerned about the long term outlook for the Dodgers, or you think that they're going to be pretty well set here for a while?
I'm concerned about the long-term effects if they don't win another World Series, because then they might not be able to re-sign Justin Turner at this point because they're already around $240 million on team payroll. They might not be able to extend Corey Seager, who's going to be a free agent next year. They might not even be able to have room for Cody Bellinger by the time that he's a free agent. Not sure where he is on the arbitration eligibility part of his contract, but still, that makes it a lot more difficult for the Dodgers. And this kind of reminds me almost of the Yankees getting Giancarlo Stanton. They got him not because it was a necessity, but because they could. The Dodgers saw an opportunity to get Bauer, and they could. But now they have to win, or else it's just going to be a bust because, again, they didn't need to do this. This was just to put the cherry on top and win the World Series again.
With a great roster like this comes great expectations and great pressure that it is kind of World Series or bust for the Dodgers at this point. And if you're not able to live up to that, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure and a whole lot of wasted money and possibly shelling out the future of the team as well. So, I mean, you got to get at least one World Series over these next 3 years of paying for Trevor Bauer. Really, I should say 2 years because he's probably going to opt out after 2022. But World Series or bust for the Dodgers. And if you just had to real quick put a number on it, what percentage chance do you give the Dodgers of defending their title here in 2021?
Really putting me on the spot here. Okay.
Is it 50-50 or is it more?
It can't be 50-50. There's so many good teams in baseball, and it's not basketball. It's not so finicky where if you have LeBron on your team, you're going to go into NBA finals just like that. So I think a reasonable estimate should be 15 to 20%, which is pretty high for baseball. I still think they're a team to beat. I still think they're clearly a better team than the Yankees or really any other team in the American League. I think their main competition is the Padres, who I really hope they meet in the playoffs because that'd be so much fun to watch. And that's what I'm kind of hoping for, because just a year-long rivalry, maybe even 2-year-long rivalry, and we get to see them face off in the playoffs again.
I would be hoping for that as well. That'd be an electric playoff matchup. And you make a good point. It's really hard to be that kind of clear hegemon dominant team in baseball. You don't really see that like college football, the NBA, other sports leagues around the world. So I think 15 to 20% is fair. I might go as high as 30%. It's a really, really stacked roster, but stuff does happen. But we'll see. It's splitting hairs at this point. The Dodgers are going to be a really, really good baseball team, and that's 100% chance of that. But also, it's going to be fun to watch them and the Padres playing this season. Definitely look forward to that as well. I think that's about all. Actually, one more point I do want to include on the Trevor Bauer signing is he mentioned famously that he would only sign 1-year deals, and that if he didn't, his friend would get to shoot him with a paintball gun in the area where you do not want to be hit with anything, much less paintballs. Are we going to see this happen, Adam? Have you heard any chatter on the paintball gun bet?
Might be the real reason why that he has 2 opt-outs in the contract, because this guy does not want to be hit in that special area from 10 feet away from a good friend. And I think Bauer would still be an idiot to reject $45 million the next year. I mean, you just got to take it as a man at that point. But I would be interesting to see. I think that's one of the reasons for the opt-out. I think that's a secret reason. It won't be discussed at all, but I would not be surprised. I also want to mention the fact that Bauer displayed this whole deal in the most Bauer way imaginable. His website actually crashed because there were so many fans buying Mets and Dodgers gear with Trevor Bauer's name on it because he was publicizing it. And then he also had a 2.5-minute video on his page about how he was just like determined about baseball and all these videos of him growing up. And then he just wears a Dodgers uniform and it breaks out. So love him or hate him, he's promoting his brand. He's great for baseball. And that was just fun to watch. He promoted himself better than how MLB could ever promote him. So that was amazing.
I'm glad you mentioned that as well, Adam. That's a great point, that he is an expert promoter and certainly a great advocate of his personal brand. And the game needs a lot more of that. I'm not a huge Trevor Bauer guy myself, but I love the marketing. I love being out there on Twitter, engaging with fans on social media. And I certainly respect that. And you know, the game needs that to grow viewership. And very cool, the kind of LeBron-esque decision type announcement there. And almost kind of trolling Mets fans too, to go ahead and sell Bauer Mets gear on his website. He's, if nothing else, he is a funny guy and an entertaining guy, and it'll be entertaining to see him pitch in Dodger blue for these next couple of years. I hadn't thought about that opt-out thing as a way to get out of the paintball gun bet, but that would be something. That's a very interesting math equation. How many millions of dollars do you leave on the table to get out of being shot with a paintball gun from that range? It's a different equation for me, not being a multi-millionaire like Trevor Bauer. It's more in the thousands range for me, perhaps, maybe even hundreds, but that's a talk for another day. Moving forward, another couple big signings throughout the league. This one kind of overshadowed by the Trevor Bauer signing, but I think potentially just as important is Marcell Ozuna sticking on with the Braves for 4 years, $64 million. And a 5th-year option as well for $16 million. So you're getting 4 years of Marcell Ozuna for not that much more expensive than 1 year for Trevor Bauer. I think it's an amazing signing for the Braves, and perhaps a sign that they expect the DH to be sticking around in the NL following the new CBA and after the 2021 season. Adam, what were your impressions of the Ozuna signing?
I was kind of surprised that it happened so quickly after the Bauer trade. This just goes to show that once one free agent signs, especially a top fish like Trevor Bauer, every other domino falls. And Marcell Ozuna was a domino that fell. And the Braves probably saw, we really got to make sure that we can go back to the playoffs. And they brought back the guy who was excellent for them last season, had a career year actually for them. And he's really the Nelson Cruz of the National League, I would say. He's amazing. He's a really potent bat, and I think the Braves have a better lineup than the Mets, which is hard to believe, but I think they just have more established players, and by bringing Ozuna back, I think they are the clear better hitting team than the Mets.
And I think they really had to bring Ozuna back, too, with all the moves the Mets have made in the offseason, going out and getting Francisco Lindor. You certainly needed an answer, and Marcell Ozuna is an awesome answer, and one that didn't really cost you an arm and a leg at 4 years, $64 million. I think that's pretty reasonable for his services, excuse me. But I love the Nelson Cruz comparison as well, because all this guy does is hit, and definitely does seem well suited to be a DH at some point, which I expect he will be once the NL finally gets with the times and changes the rules. But where he differs from Nelson Cruz is that Marcell Ozuna is only going to be 30 years old next season, which I thought he was a good bit older than that, but still pretty fresh and young at that perspective, or at that point. And in 4 years, he'll only be 34 and should still be plenty productive, still have all that power in the bat that we've seen from him, and hits for a pretty good batting average as well, typically. So I think that is another great staple in that Braves lineup to go with Freddie Freeman, Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna. It's high-powered offense there, and I would agree with you that they probably do edge out the Mets offense. Pitching is a more interesting question, but while we're kind of drawing comparisons with the Mets, who would you say is the team to beat in the NL East, and does this signing move the needle on that?
I know this shouldn't be a factor, but the Mets are going to Mets sometimes. So I kind of have these low expectations for, even though they have a great team, it's just when you're facing a team as good as the Braves in your own division, not to mention that this is the most competitive division in baseball because they have the Phillies who just signed Real Muto at the Nationals with the three aces, the Marlins who somehow sneaked into the playoffs. So this is a very competitive division. And the Mets are, they should win a vast majority of the games against the Phillies, the Nationals, and the Marlins, but it'll be a very tough race. And the Braves have been to the playoffs for the past couple of years. So I still think the Braves are a team to beat just because they've won the division a couple of times in a row, and the Mets are still entering this new Steve Cohen era for them. But I wouldn't be surprised if they win it all, or even just win the East at least.
Two very, very strong teams where I wouldn't really be surprised either way, seeing whichever one of them come out on top. And almost does kind of make me think a little bit of Dodgers versus Padres in the NL West, another great race. And maybe the Mets are kind of in that Padres role, not the experienced playoff team like the Braves would be in the NL East. They've been there for a few years now, but I guess that's a weird comparison too, because like all the Braves have those young studs, those Ronald Acuñas, Ozzy Albies. Even, Freddie Freeman not quite that young, but he's not like a postseason, perennial guy who's used to showing up in the big moment per se. But I think the Braves are a little bit more established, and the Mets kind of chasing from behind. But it'll be interesting to see for sure. I would probably lean Braves over Mets at this point, but I love what your point too, that it is a very strong division and it'll be competitive throughout. That, even if the Marlins are last place team, I think they could still hover around 500. They've shown that they have definitely some upside that we saw in the 2020 season, and it'll be interesting to see over a full 162. Do you think that Trevor Bauer would have made the difference for the Mets? Would that have moved the needle and made them the clear team to beat? Excuse me.
I think it would have, but at the same time, the Mets were wise not to go after Bauer. Real Muto, I would say, too. Springer, maybe they could have gone after him. I think that move is going to probably haunt them a little bit because they clearly need a center fielder. And now at this point, it might just be Jackie Bradley Jr., who is a solid center fielder, and maybe they don't go to extra mile and going after George Springer, but he can really make a difference for that team. And they already have an elite rotation. They already have DeGrom, Stroman, Carrasco. Syndergaard will come back at some point during the year from Tommy John surgery. I still think they have a better rotation than the Braves, and they still added to their bullpen with Trevor May. They'll have a full season to Betances. They added Michael Givens, who is an underrated reliever for the Orioles. So there's still plenty of room for the Mets to win this division.
Yeah, went out and got James McCann to be the backstop. Mm-hmm. Certainly a much cheaper option than JT Realmuto. So props to Steve Cohen for coming in and kind of instantly changing that culture, making a bunch of big moves. It's weird. He seems like he's getting criticized. I know he was kind of caught up in that whole Robin Hood stock trading thing over the last week or so, but kind of criticized from a baseball perspective as well. Like, you're not going out and getting Springer, you're not getting Bauer, but they made a lot of great moves this offseason, and the team has certainly improved. And maybe staying out of the Bauer sweepstakes or the Springer sweepstakes, that might set you up to potentially re-sign a Francisco Lindor after the 2021 season. And that would be interesting to see. And certainly the Mets are going to be spenders for the next few years to come, and a huge shortstop class coming up in next year's free agency. If it's not Francisco Lindor, I know we mentioned Corey Seager earlier in the show as well. That'd be an interesting steal from another playoff team. But another big signing, we kind of outlined three major ones, and this was the other big one, perhaps not as big as Ozuna or Bauer, certainly, but Nelson Cruz, the 40-year-old wonder DH, sticking around for the Twins on a 1-year, $13 million contract. All he does is hit and hit and hit, and there's no sign of decline coming yet. He was amazing again in 2020. I'm happy to see Nelson Cruz getting paid and sticking around in a good situation for him where we know he's going to be able to DH every day. Are you optimistic about the Cruz signing as I am, Adam?
I think it just makes sense for the Twins because you have the White Sox at the top of the division. they've been making plenty of moves this offseason, including trading for Lance Lynn and also a very underrated signing in Adam Eden. So they're still the team to beat in the Central, but adding Nelson Cruz back to the Bomba squad kind of fortifies their lineup. It says to the White Sox, hey, we're still the team that has the Major League home run record, and we have pretty much the same band of players that we're bringing back. So it certainly helps them out. The White Sox obviously need to help out the rotation, help out the bullpen, and that's why I still don't think they're the team to beat in the Central, but this is a good start.
Without Cruz, I probably would have given that nod to the White Sox, but I think I'm with you, Adam, that bringing him back really solidifies that lineup to where I'll probably still go Twins as the team to beat in the AL Central. I think the White Sox are coming. The question is whether or not they get there this year or if it's 2022 for me. But I mean, that's an up-and-coming team for sure, but I think the Twins may be able to hold them off one more year, keeping that slugger Nelson Cruz around. But also, as we mentioned, going to be 40 years old. So, I mean, the bottom's going to fall out at some point for him, or perhaps it's more of a gradual decline, or maybe he's just the Tom Brady of baseball and he can play until he's 45. And the way he's hitting, it kind of looks like it. But I'm happy to continue to see another year of Nelson Cruz for the Twins. I think that's a perfect match for him, and he's going to be still slotted in the heart of that lineup. But another couple, a slew actually, of smaller moves throughout the league, and it's kind of a long list. Maybe I'll just touch on the first couple of these, and then we can break down as we want. But a former Twin, outfielder Eddie Rosario, was non-tendered by Minnesota earlier this offseason, and he kind of stuck the ultimate middle finger to his former team in signing with a division rival, Cleveland, adding Eddie Rosario to that outfield. They desperately needed offense as well. Rosario getting a 1-year, $8 million contract for Cleveland. And this one is a major-ish deal. So I'll pause and let you weigh in on this one before I continue further down this list. Adam, any takeaways from the Rosario signing?
This kind of makes me think that the Indians still want to be competitive because their outfield is pretty much straight garbage at this point. No offense to any of the Indians outfielders, but when you're being led by Oscar Mercado, you know something's kind of wrong. And they also have some decent guys in Tyler Naquin and Bradley Zimmer. But Rosario, you know what you're going to get out of him. He's going to hit 30 homers. Lucky to have a .330 on base percentage. Not the best fielder, but he might be the most powerful hitter in the Indians lineup at this point, along with, I guess, Franmil Reyes. But it helps them out, gives them a bona fide outfielder who you know you're going to get out of him, and he's not too costly for them either.
Exactly. I think cost is the major factor here. 1 year, $8 million. That's pretty reasonable for a guy who's been a very consistent offensive player and who could be one of the better bats in that lineup. Wild how low the Cleveland's payroll still is, even with that signing. I think if I saw correctly earlier this week, Trevor Bauer alone is going to be making more in 2021 than Cleveland, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh with their whole entire rosters. That's insane. But good for Trevor Bauer getting his money. Crazy that Cleveland, I'm hesitant to call them the Indians. I'm not sure where exactly they landed with getting rid of that team name. But crazy that they're still kind of in the conversation. They're, not the favorites in the division, but they're going to be competitive-ish. And they don't spend any money at all. That's good for them, I guess. Moneyball, perhaps the new face of that movement. But sticking in the AL Central, Alex Colomé signing with the Twins on a 1-year, $5 million contract with a $5.5 million club option for 2022. Perhaps expected to split closing duties with Taylor Rogers. Certainly helps to add that arm to the bullpen. I guess this is major-ish too. I don't know if we necessarily need to pause for this one. Adam, anything big to weigh in on Colomé?
Well, what I like seeing from the Twins right now is they're stealing away a couple of players that could have gone to the White Sox. Cruz could have gone to the White Sox, and Colomé was just on the White Sox. So I think the Twins are making a statement here, signing both players, saying, hey, we're not out of this division just yet. And Colomé helps their bullpen needs. The Twins already have a decent bullpen. I would still like to see them add a piece or two, but Colomé as a closer and Rogers right behind as number 8 as the 8th man. That's pretty good. That's a nice number 1-2 in the bullpen.
Absolutely. Either one who could be a closer on himself or by himself rather. So to have that combo at the back end of the bullpen is certainly going to be a nice combo for the Twins, and definitely like the perspective looking at that in comparison to guys who could have been White Sox. They're sticking around. Minnesota's not going anywhere. An interesting trade that we saw come in, I believe it was earlier today. It's been a long day, man, but the A's dealing Crush Davis to the Rangers for shortstop Elvis Andrus, who I think had been with the Rangers for perhaps his entire career. Weird, kind of sad to see him not be able to finish his career in Texas, and rare these days to see actual major league pieces trading hands. But I hope Chris Davis can kind of benefit from an environment change. I know he's had a rough couple last years after being so consistent with a 40 home run, 90-ish RBI pace for the last 3 years prior to that. I think he'll get an opportunity to kind of reinvent himself as a member of the Rangers. And some minor league pieces, not any huge prospects changing hands in that deal as well. Any takeaways from that one, Adam?
I think both teams are just trying to fill a need. The Rangers have a big gap in the outfield, so Chris Davis helps them out in that capacity. And the A's also lost Marcus Semien to the Toronto Blue Jays, so Andrus takes over at shortstop. It shouldn't be a very high-profile trade because both players are probably past their prime, past their best point as Major League Baseball players. Even so, Elvis Andrus had a pretty nice 2019 season. He had 12 homers, 31 stolen bases, rough 2020 season. He can still bounce back. And the A's are trading a decent-sized contract for another decent-sized contract because both teams don't really spend too much. So it's a solid deal. It makes sense. It's a little weird to see both these franchise icons leave each franchise, but you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the financial aspect of that as well. Some big contracts changing place, and hopeful that both of these guys can get back on track. They're not too far removed from being good, effective baseball players. So I believe in the upside for both of them. They could turn it around, and hopefully they both do find success in their new destinations. I'll start running a little faster through our free agent list here. Chris Archer going back to the Rays on a 1-year, $6.5 million deal. That, of course, is hilarious considering the Pirates traded for Chris Archer, gave up Tyler Glasnow and Austin Meadows, and now Chris Archer's back on the Rays. So Pirates going to Pirates on that one. And then Colton Wong going to the Brewers on a 2-year, $18 million deal. I think that could be interesting. Wong, a nice two-way player, and the Brewers certainly needed to make a splash to keep up with Nolan Arenado. Going to go head out to the Cardinals. I know you guys discussed that on last week's podcast. Some players changing hands here in the Central. We saw the Tigers re-signing Jonathan, or re-signing. He was there already. Jonathan Schoop staying with the Tigers on a 1-year, $4.5 million deal. Yeah, Detroit's still kind of a wasteland for the next couple of years, but you got AJ Hinch, maybe start turning things around, and good to have veteran leadership in the clubhouse, if nothing else. Giants getting Tommy LaStella. And provide trash cans. That'll definitely help turn that offense around as well. That's a good point there, Adam. Giants signing Tommy LaStella to a 3-year, $18.75 million contract. Pretty good money for the utility guy. And Tommy LaStella, moving to the other side of the bay, was with the A's last year after being traded from the Angels earlier in the season. I know I just went through a couple of signings right there. I'll pause, let you weigh in on any significance from those couple of signings there, Adam.
Well, first off, I think it's fair to mention the Chris Archer deal because he spent so long in Tampa Bay. He was their ace. I think he was always a bit overrated because he had a very high ERA in his last 2 years, and they really thought that he would win a Cy Young Award at some point, and he never turned out that way. But I know we all made fun of him because of the Pirates trade, but he really wasn't that bad for the Pirates. He had a high ERA, but he was still an innings eater. And when you look at Tampa Bay's pitching rotation right now, it goes Tyler Glasnow, then Ryan Yarborough. So that's two unreliable pitchers who haven't really given consistent amount of innings throughout their major league career. So even if Chris Archer has a 4.5 ERA, if he could throw 150 innings, that'd be great for the Rays rotation. Another signing I really liked was the Tommy LaStella deal because I think the Giants are starting to shift in a direction where they want to get Brandon Crawford off the books, Brennan Belt off the books, Buster Posey off the books. I think they're going to have a major 2021 free agency, and I think they'll be right back to where they want to be and bring back another Giants dynasty. So I think Stella is a good start, and he doesn't cost too much for them either.
That's a good point too. Could be a not necessarily like a cornerstone piece, but a good building block and something that you're not going to have to put down a whole lot of money to secure. And a good batter, a good versatile player who can fill in multiple defensive positions. So I like the signing of Stella as well. I think that could be a good fit. And I agree. I think the Giants are on their way back soon. A couple other free agent signings here, or a trade rather, actually. Dexter Fowler going to the Angels, departing from the Cardinals, going to be reunited with his coach, former coach, I should say, Joe Madden. Of course, the duo famously won the 2016 World Series, as I love to remind myself, especially these days when my team's kind of trending downwards. But good for Dexter Fowler. I think he needed an environment change. Speaking of environment change, a guy who was pitching in Japan, left-handed pitcher Matt Moore, agreeing to a one-year, $3 million contract with the Phillies. He was formerly an all-star with the Rays in 2013 and had struggled really to find his footing after that, but good for Matt Moore getting another shot in the bigs. We see the Red Sox signing starting pitcher Garrett Richards to a one-year, $10 million contract. That seemed a little rich for my liking. And then Felix Hernandez, a minor league deal with the Orioles. Really, King Felix couldn't even get a major league deal, and he's only 34, man. How the mighty have fallen. I know that's really been a skills decline and a velocity decline for Hernandez as well these last few years. But, I mean, at least he's going to have a shot perhaps to make it up into that Orioles rotation and then get pummeled by AL East lineups.
I really hope Hernandez finds some success. It won't be easy in the AL East, especially with the Blue Jays having such a talented roster coming to the season. Even the Red Sox lineup is still very dangerous, including their youngsters, Michael Chavis and Bobby Dalbat. So it's going to be a tough time for him. I don't think he's really going to spend too much longer in the majors. I hope he proves me wrong. He just has a lot of mileage on that arm. The Mariners have had him in the organization since 15, and then he leaves them. They kind of just let him go and went to the Braves. Couldn't really find his way there after opting out. And hopefully he should get a chance at the Orioles. I would imagine he would, just because the Orioles are still a bottom feeder team and won't make the playoffs anytime soon. And then it is also,
I was just going to say, I don't think that pitching Hernandez necessarily goes against the tanking strategy. That might help, if anything, get you in better draft position.
Yeah, definitely. It could really help them out. And I also want to go back to that trade you mentioned about Dexter Fowler going to the Angels. So that's an interesting deal for the Angels because they have Joe Adell in the outfield. And they have a lot of promise for him. And maybe they just want more of an established player. But Dexter Fowler is really a league average player who costs a decent amount of money. So I don't get the thought process of them. I like the deal for the Cardinals, though, even though you're going to be relying a lot on Harrison Bader, Dylan Carlson, and Tyler O'Neill, which is not an established group at all. But I think they need to take money off the books after getting Arenado. And when you have someone like Dexter Fowler, who's really a league average player, it makes sense to move him.
Yeah, I love you mentioning the financial implications of that as well. It's definitely clearing up space for that Arenado contract coming on the books. And I kind of like that it's going to let Tyler O'Neill finally get more of a shot in that outfield. We've seen flashes of the power bat for O'Neill, and I think good for Fowler too, a guy who needed an environment change, which you mentioned that Angels outfield there's Angels in the outfield, man. It's going to be crowded out there. I think Joe Adell will probably get the lion's share of the time over Fowler, but I mean, Fowler's going to play. They didn't take on that contract to bench him. Just like I think Pujols is still going to continue to play, at least in some capacity. And they are finally in the last year of that deal. I think they got one more year of Justin Upton as well. So some more financial flexibility on the horizon for the Angels. But speaking of Angels, they actually also traded for Orioles starter Alex Cobb. They gave up a former second-round pick in prospect Jahmai Jones, who's a second baseman. He hadn't really found much of his footing in the minor leagues, had not really lived up to that second-round draft pick, but not a huge implications in that trade. Just something worth mentioning. The Angels trying to reshuffle a little bit, maybe find some way to unlock value and finally get this man Mike Trout in the playoffs where he deserves to be. Another former Angel going to the Twins, Andrelton Simmons, inking a one-year, $10.5 million deal. Pretty big money for Simmons, a great defensive player who's respectable with the bat as well. And he's actually projected by Roster Resource to start over Jorge Polanco. So I thought that was an interesting signing as well. Adam, any final takeaways on some of our more minor moves before we move on to top 10 third baseman?
I really like the Andrelton Simmons signing for the Twins because they might not be the best defensive team outside of Byron Buxton. So having probably the best defensive shortstop in baseball right up the middle, that really should help them out. And they already don't have the best pitching staff in the majors, so this can really just add to it. I also really don't like the deal for Alex Cobb for the Angels. Why not get a Jake Odorizzi? Why not go harder after Tanaka? Why not get an established starter? I don't get this for them because Cobb has not been great for a while. He costs a lot of money, and Jahmai Jones was heavily talked about for the Angels for so many years, and now the Orioles just added a prospect. So they signed Cobb to this massive contract. They have that off the books now and get a former blue chip prospect as well. This is a great deal for the Orioles, and I don't get why the Angels wouldn't just try to go after a more established pitcher.
I would agree with you on that as well. I don't think there's really much to be excited about for Alex Cobb, and I don't think he's really drastically better than the kind of, I don't want to say a full-out dumpster fire in the Angels rotation, but you have a lot of average to below average pitchers in that rotation already. I guess Alex Cobb fits in nicely in that respect, but don't think he's moving the needle for them in the AL West. Still chasing the Astros and the A's, I would say at this point, the Angels are. But you have the best player in the world, things can happen. And Shohei Ohtani, I think, will be exciting to see him returning to the starting rotation as well, at least in some capacity. Maybe not going to throw 200 innings, but it'll be interesting to see him. I think it's time for our top 10 third baseman, Adam, as we continue our top 10 positional series. And this is going to be a fun one. This is one of the deeper positions in baseball where it was actually really tough to come up with narrowing it down to a top 10 list. And we've got some studs on our list here, man. So why don't you go ahead and do the honors of getting us started and let us know who you have at number 10.
First, I just want to mention how deep this position is because there were so many players I had to leave off. Ke'Bryan Hayes, who was amazing for the Pirates last year in a short span and really projects to be their new franchise cornerstone. Gio Urshela, who I personally love as a Yankee fan, and just another great Cashman deal. And Kevin Biggio being left off my list as well, even though he's moving to third base. And really over a full season, he's been excellent as a career 3.8 F4. So a lot of tough players to leave off, and Justin Turner as well. But my number 10 will have to be Rafael Devers. I actually met his hitting coach, Matt Young, in a couple years ago when I broadcast in the Tidewater Summer League. He helped him become this really great hitter, really allowed him to excel in his 2019 season. So even though he's just had one good season in his career, I think he's still the real deal offensively, probably not defensively, and for that reason, he's at number 10 on my list. And I think he also, of course, bounced back from a poor 2020 season.
I love Rafael Devers a lot too, man. I have him included on my list a little bit higher up than you, actually. We somewhat differ on Devers, but we don't differ in that we both respect the talent, respect the bat, and think he's got all the upside in the world and a talented, young, bright player in the league. My number 10, a guy who's still pretty young in his own right and who's struggled a little bit over the last few seasons, but how could I not include my guy, Kris Bryant, at number 10, the former Rookie of the Year, the former MVP, the former World Series champion, the College World Series champion. He's got the trophy case to go with anybody. And I love Kris Bryant with all my heart, even though this is probably his last year in Chicago. I know he struggled over the last couple years, but it hasn't been as pronounced as a lot of people tend to believe. You throw out last season, it was terrible. I mean, it was a shortened season. I think it's fair to say that's kind of a fluke, weird year. It's small sample size. He was awful in 2020 for what it's worth. But, I mean, the OPS has still been over 900 in 3 of the 4 years before 2020. So I think Kris Bryant still got it. And I'm ready for him to turn it around, even if he ends up getting traded and it's for another team other than my Cubs.
I like the fact that you mentioned how 2020 is a weird year for Kris Bryant. I mean, it was a weird year for everyone, but his walk rate went down by over 3%. His strikeout rate went over 5%, so around 5%. So it was very uncharacteristically bad for Kris Bryant. And his exit has been going down for the last couple of years as well. And that's why he's not higher on my list. He's my number 9 player, but pretty much every year besides 2020, he's been an above average performer. He's been one of the better third basemen in the game. And for that reason alone, he's deserving of a bounce back 2021 season. And of course, deserving to be number 9 on my list.
And I think the glove's gotten a little bit better for Brian as well. It's not quite the liability that it was a few years ago. So good for him working to improve that defense as well. A guy who also could benefit from a little bit of defensive work, but he's pretty old at this point, so he might be just focused on hitting tanks, I should say. My number 9 is Josh Donaldson, part of that Bomba Squad Twins team that we were talking about earlier in the show, and another guy who kind of suffered through a bad 2020, batting .222 with only 6 home runs. But I'm betting on the bounce back for Josh Donaldson. He's another former MVP in his own right. He's got a lot of power in that bat. I think he can easily hit 30 home runs again, approach 100 RBIs, and do it with a pretty respectable batting average. I think he can usually hover around that 270 to 280 range. So the glove is bad, but I'm betting on a bounce back for Josh Donaldson. He's my number 9.
You know what's kind of weird, Henry? Josh Donaldson is only 35 years old. I thought he was older. I thought he was 37 or 38. He's only 35. He is getting up there, though, I have to admit. He has a lingering calf injury. That's the same one that affected him a couple years back that resurfaced in 2020. He also is getting up there in age, as I mentioned, but when he's healthy, he's great. And he's expected to hit 30-plus home runs, have a great walk rate, be an incredible defender. So when he's on the field, he should be just fine. And he's really an important piece of this Twins lineup. They won't go that far if he doesn't juice as well. So he's higher on my list, but he's a nice choice. Going to my number 8 pick, I have Eugenio Suarez, and he also had a bit of a rough 2020 season. The power was still there, and a lot of his career numbers were there too. ISO, walk percentage, strikeout percentage, all near career norms. And this is a guy who's just 2 year removed from a 49 homer season. So I have a lot of confidence he could bounce back and be a great contributor for the Reds.
No argument here, man. Eugenio Suarez was number 8 on my list as well. And I agree with you. I think the 2019 version of him is closer to the real Suarez than what we saw in 2020. And it's just, as you mentioned, the career norms and the underlying data being close to normal. It just goes to show how weird that 2020 season with a small sample size was, where you don't have 162 games for the power to kind of regulate and see what we would expect over the larger sample size. So yeah, I think Suarez can get back to approaching 40 home runs, and he's got one of the best ballparks in baseball to do it in. He can hit tanks in Cincinnati, the Great American Launch Pad, all day long. And I think he's going to be part of a strong lineup that's going to give him great counting stats as well. So Suarez at 8 for me too.
And then moving along to number 7, that's where Josh Donaldson is for me. I still think that even with his age and injury history in recent years, he's still Josh Donaldson. He's still the bringer of rain. He's still part of the Bomba Squad. He'll be just fine. I have a lot of faith in him. He's always been a late bloomer. I'm actually surprised. This only will be his 12th season in the Major League, so he'll be fine. He should be all right. And when he's healthy, he's exceptional. He's not longer his 2015 self, but still one of the better third basemen in the game.
He was a late bloomer. I kind of forgot about that, and he feels like a guy who's been around longer than he has been. But certainly, all the talent in the world for Josh Donaldson, and I would expect to bounce back as well. Moving forward, my number 7 is a guy who a lot of people would probably have a little higher on this list, but I've kind of cooled on him since he's left Baltimore, and that is, of course, Manny Machado, third baseman for those so talented San Diego Padres, and talented as well is Machado himself. But the stats have kind of been all over the place since he left Baltimore, man. And he's such a fly ball dominant hitter to where I think that ballpark factor really has hurt him. We saw it in a small sample size as a member of the Dodgers and in San Diego as well. Certainly not the hitter's park that Camden Yards is. They did move the fences in a little bit. And he was pretty awesome in 2020. He batted .304. He had 16 home runs in the short season, 47 RBI. OPS was back over 950, something that he hadn't done in a few years. So I think the talent is definitely still there for Manny Machado. It's just the consistency is a little bit off, and that's why I couldn't rank him higher. But the glove is awesome for Machado as well, and the defensive versatility, of course, a former shortstop, Tatis manning that position for the Padres. But plenty of upside, plenty of talent for Manny, and still only going to be 28 next year. He's been around forever, man.
And I think for that reason alone, I have such high expectations for him, especially after having a great 60-game season for the Padres last year. Because when you think about it, he's been all over the place, not really, I mean, in terms of WAR, but also in terms of just location. Going from the Orioles, being traded to the Dodgers, signing this big deal in San Diego, and then last year he finally settled in. And I think that will translate over a 162-game season, which he's still been very healthy. He should play the majority of those games. And if it's anything like this past year, he should be just fine, really reestablishing himself as one of the better third baseman game. But I understand putting him lower on the list. That's definitely a safe pick, putting him at number 7. Going along to number 6, though, I have Alex Bregman. He would be much higher on my list. He'd probably be number 4 for me. But trash cans. That's really the reason why he's so low. He had a really bad 2020 season. And I want to believe the hype. I want to think that he can be another 6+ WAR player, and be great on both sides of the ball. But I just need to see it another year after the trash cans incident. And that for that reason alone, he's lower on my list.
And I don't think that's unfair at all to see him go from 40+ home runs in 2019 to you get caught and all of a sudden he just sucks in 2020. So I think those are very fair concerns for Bregman, and I'm going to want to see him over a full season as well. See if that was just 2020 noise or if the post-cheating Astros are not as good as they used to be. But I still like the talent for Bregman as well. I'm a little bit higher up on the list. But number 6 for me, I went ahead and did Matt Chapman, the Studley third baseman for Oakland A's. Ben Rossi would be happy for me, including Chapman on this list. He may have had him a little bit higher, actually, but a great two-way player. The glove is amazing, and the bat is pretty phenomenal as well. Hits for great power, a guy who could push 40 home runs. Kind of one concern where you may not go as high is that he had pretty significant hip surgery in this offseason. I think I don't know if it was quite a hip replacement, but something along those lines where it does make you kind of question the power going forward. But certainly the glove is still going to be there. And it only 28, but he's only been around for 4 years. Another late bloomer in Matt Chapman as well. But that's certainly not old in baseball years. I think he'll bounce back hopefully nicely, and that health isn't a lingering concern.
This is the type of guy who burst onto the scene on Major League Baseball, had a great rookie year, then back-to-back 6 WAR seasons, and now he had this hip surgery. So you got to wonder about the power output. I'm actually really glad that you mentioned that, because I really hadn't thought about how that affects his power capability. He should be fine, though. He might be the best defensive third baseman in baseball. I would even go to say maybe even better than Nolan Arenado. He's won a Platinum Glove, maybe 2 actually. So he's a phenomenal player. He should be just fine for the A's next year. He's a bit higher on my list, but I understand the concern for leaving him lower. Then going to number 5, I have Manny Machado, because once again, he really settled to San Diego last year, maybe understanding that he has this great responsibility in his contract. Not saying he didn't have them in the first place, but maybe the pressure didn't get to him as much, and especially at the fans last year, maybe that helped as well. So I really think he's going to have a big season. He might even be higher in this list by the end of 2021. I can even see him being number 3 or so. He's an excellent third baseman and one of the most underrated players in the game, and still a great player.
And I love the point you made about Manny, too, that maybe now he is just finally settling in after all those different moves, moving around so much, different teams, that perhaps he has kind of found his environment where he's comfortable, and that 2020 stats were legit. So I'm definitely going to be interested to watch Manny in 2021, perhaps even get some fantasy baseball shares of him. Now that you mention that, Adam, that maybe I'm a little bit too harsh on Manny, and I need to reconsider. But number 5 for me, a guy I know we discussed earlier, how you had him a little bit lower on the list, but Rafael Devers, man, is only going to be 24 next season. And the upside that he flashed in 2019 was just so much that I had to include him higher up on my list. We saw 32 home runs, a 916 OPS, batting .311 that year. And if he can give me that kind of offensive production, that almost, weighs out any concerns with the glove. And, being a young enough guy, he's got time to figure out defense, right? I'm just worried about home runs and tanks, man. And Rafael Devers can provide that offensive value. And I love to see a young guy like that let the kids play and let the kids play as well as Rafael Devers has. And he's certainly going to have an opportunity, too, in that kind of Not as great as usually his Boston Red Sox lineup. That playing time, no concern at all. They're going to let Devers go.
I'm still a little bit concerned about his defense. He's not that bad defensively at third base, and he was even listed as a above average third baseman defensively just a couple years ago. So he could still make some amends with the glove, but man, oh man, this guy hit. And I even remember this moment his first year where he faced off against Aroldis Chapman, and Chapman threw him this 103-mile-per-hour fastball. He sent over the left center field fence. And I was like, all right, this guy, he's going to be a pain in the Yankees side for years to come. So I have no worries about him, and I really do wish him all the best, even though maybe not against the Yankees. That'd be a little bit more preferred. Number 4 on my list, though, is Matt Chapman. Great defender. I still don't think he's really going to become this guy who hits 40 home runs. I think he's going to have a low average, decent walk rate, but the defense will always make him a plus third baseman. And I think because his offensive ceiling is a bit limited, he's not even higher in this list, but he's still a great player.
Yeah, no argument there. I think Matt Chapman's got all the talent in the world, and I love that he does bring it on both sides of the field as well. It's not just a great bat, it's a great glove. And so often when I'm going through our top 10 list, I'm inclined to just do like offensive everything, all offensive stats. But it's important to remember that the glove counts too, and he's a guy that does it on both sides. But number 4 for me, we mentioned earlier, Alex Bregman, and I think the trash can concerns are very fair. I want to see him do it in a full season where, we don't have the cheating and see what the numbers look like. But I think the upside is still so apparent with Bregman, and it's hard to untangle that from how much is real, how much is video monitor assisted. But despite the bad 2020, I think we still saw him be an on-base machine, and I think that's something that's not going to go anywhere, and he's going to continue to hit. The offense is going to bounce back, hopefully, and a good glove for Alex Bregman as well, another former shortstop that usually helps and playing the hot corner, having a good glove. But I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a 41 homer guy like we saw in the trash can aided 2019 season, but I think that maybe somewhere in the realm of 30 home runs and could certainly be a 290 batting average guy with good defense. I think I have no qualms putting him at number 4 on my list.
He's been pretty consistent throughout his major league career, and perhaps it was a bit too harsh on him for the trash cans incident, even though it is well worth mentioning. But it could have just been a poor 2020 season, which so many great players had in last year's debacle. So I can certainly see him coming back, and he's an interesting player, and I'd like to see him succeed beyond the cheating scandal. My number 3 pick, it's going to surprise a lot of people, but it's Nolan Arenado, and I just want to confirm that this is not because of the Coors Field effect. I actually heard this great talk from Jared Diamond earlier this week, and he said players such as DJ LeMahieu and Matt Holliday, once they have left Coors Field, they have been just fine. And a lot of players who struggle at Coors Field, it's more because the balls break differently in Coors Field, it's a different angle, and going between home and road so often during the season, that's more the reason why, not because it's a juice ballpark, which it kind of is. But I think the Coors Field effect is not as bad as people say it is. I've been critical of it before, but I'm starting to lean off of it a little bit. However, I still think Arenado's power be sapped a little bit. I could still see him as a 30-homer player, one of the greatest defensive third basemen in all of baseball, maybe perhaps all of baseball history. So he should be just fine, but still, even with the Rockies at his height of heights, still really only a 5-WAR player. I know that WAR is a bit of an overused stat, but for that reason, I kind of have him a little bit lower on my list.
I'm a little surprised that his WAR doesn't usually come out higher than that with how amazing the glove typically is and how great and monstrous the offensive stats usually are, even if boosted by Coors Field and that high altitude for sure. I still have Arenado a little bit higher up on my list. I think even moving out of Coors, I think he's going to continue to be amazing. And I like the point, too, that it hurts you as a player in Coors to have to go on the road and travel outside of that environment. It's difficult to adjust. So I think that may help normalize his splits for sure, at least in the 2021 season. So that'll be interesting to watch. But number 3 on my list is a guy we have not yet mentioned and who, looking at your notes, I see you have him a little higher. But, hey, we're both top 3 on him. I have one of Cleveland's few remaining good players in Jose Ramirez, a great power speed combo guy who generally gives you a very good batting average. I think the reason where I hesitated to put Ramirez any higher up on this list is that the stats have been a little bit back and forth a little bit over the last few seasons. I think he mostly got that sorted out in 2020 and the back half of 2019 as well. But he had like a full, pretty much 162 game stretch between the beginning of 2019 and the end of 2018 where he was like a 200 hitter. So that's where I hesitate a little bit with Ramirez. And that's really the only bad thing I can say about him because the whole rest of his career, he's been a consistent stud, awesome power speed, amazing bat. I don't know if he's very well known for the glove, but when you can hit like he can and you provide all the other value that he does, it really doesn't matter. And certainly a slam dunk top 3 third baseman.
Fun fact about Jose Ramirez, he's never been a below average defender ever in his career. He's always been above average. So it's not as highly touted as Nolan Arenado or Matt Chapman, but he can still handle the hot corner rather well defensively. I actually am pretty glad that you mentioned how he did struggle between 2018 and 2019. I was only aware about the 2019 first half, but to me, he seemed like the rightful owner of the 2020 AL MVP award. I know that Shane Bieber got a lot of deserving credit for his excellent Cy Young campaign, but the Indians would be nowhere without Ramirez last year, especially since Lindor wasn't the same type of player that he was a couple of years ago for the Indians. He could always serve around 2021, but Ramirez was clearly the one leading the offense, and he's one of the most best 5-tool players in the game. So he's my number 1, and I understand the concern for leaving him a little bit behind.
And I think, like I said too, I think he's mostly sorted that out. So I don't think it's really, certainly still including him in the top 3. He's a stud, and there's no way to argue that. And I can't fault you for putting him at number 1 as well. When it's a position this great and so deep, it almost really just kind of comes down to subjectivity, preference, and I can't blame you going number 1. But number 2, a guy who we did agree on and who is very safe, very steady, very consistent, even going to a new location last year. Struggled a little bit at the beginning of 2020, but certainly figured it out down the stretch after years and years of being a stud for the Nationals. And that is Anthony Rendon, the third baseman for the Los Angeles Angels. He, a great defender, perhaps not highly as touted as Arenado and Chapman, but still solid with the glove and an on-base absolute machine, takes all the walks, hits for a great average, hits for good pop as well too. Just a great, well-rounded ball player and certainly a very consistent, steady performer who, it's maybe not the upside as Nolan Arenado or Jose Ramirez, maybe not quite to that level, but I think as safe a floor as any player on this list, really any player in baseball. So Anthony Rendon, number 2 for me, and I take it you agree on that as well, Adam, seeing as that's where he's at in your list.
Yeah, I think I jumped the gun a little bit going to Jose Ramirez at number 1, so my apologies to the viewers for that. And yeah, he's a great defender, still one of the more underrated players in baseball. According to some metrics last year, he was better than Mike Trout, so that's pretty notable. And he's obviously locked up in Los Angeles for a long time, and very deservingly so. Should be another 30-homer player, great defensive player, and also draws his walks as well. So criminally underrated, and it was actually really tough for me not to put him at number 1. He's, I think, had the most WAR since 2016 or so, or he's up there, maybe even over Jose Ramirez. So he's very close to me for being number 1 spot, but I just have to put him a little bit behind.
Hey, if the WAR says so, I can't argue with that hard data. That's probably the best overall number of value, and I really can't argue with WAR. But definitely glad to hear that we both have him in the top 2, and that we're not underrating him on the Exit Velo podcast. We're giving Anthony Rendon his due, even if the rest of the baseball world may be reluctant to. We see you, Anthony Rendon. We know how awesome you are. Maybe you'll come on and give us an interview because we're showing you some love here, even if we didn't rank you number 1. But that would be awesome someday if we could bring him on the show, or really any of these guys on the list. That would be amazing. But I feel great about our top 10 list. I should say Nolan Arenado is my number 1. I know we already discussed him too, and I don't think anything more really needs to be said. Great glove, great bat, and it'll be interesting to see him outside of Coors Field, but I think certainly going to be a productive player still. That's about all we have for the show today. Thank you all for sticking with us for a little over an hour today, but hey, a lot of great news and a lot of amazing third basemen to discuss as well. So as we mentioned, the season is almost there, folks. I think we got one more episode before pitchers and catchers report. But thank you all so much for watching another great episode of the Exit Velo podcast. This has been number 68. I'm Henry Winkelhake, joined with Adam Cohen. This is Exit Velo, provided by Back Sports Page. Thank you all, and you all have a great night.